actually have to look at economic empowerment, you have to look at climate change and so on. So we found ourselves doing different things since then. But basically the way we operate is that it's a two-way relationship with coffee growers, right? So we, of course, support coffee grown under the shade of trees. We guarantee a buyback and so on and so forth. But we also require or request producers to keep 100 trees an acre, 22 species of trees an acre, maintain 60% shade cover or whatever. We have our set of farming standards, similar to what we would think of as a certification, but we don't call it that. We call it a farming philosophy. And in return, we guarantee a buyback. We have long-term relationships with some of the growers we have, and then we provide market access. The interesting thing about biodiversity in the context of climate change and resilience is, of course, that we find that biodiversity impacts agriculture in many ways, and perhaps more so in coffee than a lot of different crops. So we found farms that don't have bees on them to have 20% less coffee productivity than farms that do have bees. We found farms that don't have spiders or wasps to face more pest outbreaks year to year than farms that do have spiders and wasps, and so on and so forth. So that's really the story, and maybe I'll stop there. I think there's, I guess, a lot of reflections we have from the market front as well, right? So now we are in India, probably one of the 5 most well-known specialty coffee companies. So we retail our coffee across online, in cafes. So if you walk into a fancy cafe in India, in Bangalore city, it's likely that that coffee will be biodiversity-friendly coffee. The process, and we do the same with different companies as well. So we've tried to mainstream our coffee as much as possible, and that's been an interesting experience, partly because we found that people don't really care about biodiversity, and we might approach it as a biodiversity project or as a social enterprise that looks after coffee growers, etc., but people just want a good cup of coffee. And so that's been an interesting marketing, communication, reframing in our mind how we approach that whole thing. And we're still in the process of figuring out really what we are. Are we a coffee company? Are we an economic development company? Are we a technology company? Because really a lot of our sales and retail happen online. It's quite far from wanting to study biodiversity.
As I said before, and he has also come back to farming and organizing farmers for green production. Okay, let me hand over to him to hear from him what he wants to say.
Thanks a lot, Abdulji, and that was very nice, and I think a great tone was set for the conversation. Just to quickly give you context, I think my journey towards agriculture started a decade ago when in a Telangana state, so in a village, during one summer evening, I was playing in the fields, and I felt slightly hungry, famished, and I was looking for grabbing something out there, and at a distance I found a farmer, like about a good furlong distance, I found some farmer eating something. And it's a very common thing in our villages that when someone is eating something, you can just go and ask them and they'll give you, right? So I kind of, I was I think in my 12th standard, I just ran to that person, just wanted to grab a bite. And I was astonished to find that what he was eating was mud. Now that just took me back. I was like, what? What is this mud eating business? And I just asked him, so I was like actually angry on him. Now on hindsight, when I just think of it, I kind of dislike that emotion what I had, but I was actually angry at him. I was like, what's wrong with you? I just shouted at him. What is this eating mud? If you're hungry, go and eat food. What is this eating mud? I just shouted at him. So he was like a 70-year-old farmer, and his answer was, my stomach doesn't know that my pocket is empty. That is it. And he just walked over from that place. That sentence went on to ring in my ear multiple times. I came back that night. When I was walking back home, I was thinking of that. And I saw my grandfather and I just told him about this. I said, what is this weird thing of farmers eating mud? He said, look, he's not the only farmer eating mud. He said, at least 70 to 80 lakh farmers in India at different points of time in the year eat mud because of drought, because of pest attacks which destroy the crops. So he said, it's not a story of just one farmer. He said, it's a story of at least 100 million farmers in India. And not that all the 100 million farmers are eating that, but at least like 60 to 70 lakh farmers are actually doing that every year out of the 100 million farmers that we have in India. Now that took me aback and I said, hey, I told my grandfather, I want to fight for the problems of farmers. With all his wisdom, he said, enough of people have already fought. If you can, try solving, otherwise keep quiet. That was the conversation with which I just left a decade ago, and then, of course, I continued my chartered accountancy, and as soon as I finished my chartered accountancy, I made up my mind that I didn't want to delay any further, and I straight got into farming. For the first couple of years, I didn't talk about any farmer.
Okay, thank you, Arsia, for your very nice presentation, a very noble work that you're doing. My question to you is, this biodiversity coffee which you're talking about, did you have ever any study on the health implications? I mean, does it have any comparative advantage over the other coffees? Like say, I'm telling this because we are promoting organic vegetables, saying that it has health implications. No, you take the regular vegetables, which have a lot of pesticide chemicals into it. So that is the way of promoting, market promotion for the vegetables. Is there anything of that sort in this biodiversity vegetable, the coffee which you are talking about? Now, the second thing, to Satya, actually, great work that you're doing. And I just want to tell you, it's not a question, but, just information to you, that in Nepal, we did face a problem of similar type as you're doing, smallholders who have been, hardy subsistence farmers. We try to transform them into semi-commercial farmers. Smallholders, in our case, you said, still the hectares that you are saying is quite big. We say less than 1 hectare is a smallholder in our case. And mostly in Nepal, about 70% are less than 1 hectare. So that's a very big challenge. But then through these greenhouses, small greenhouses, through these collection centers, we have been able to transform their lives. And right now, there are around 250 collection centers in operation, which not only ensures 20% higher price for the commodities or products that they're selling, but they are also, enhancing their income to a great extent. Well, I'll invite you sometime and come and, see our website, ID website, and also, come sometime and see how we are working on it. Thank you.
First, we take the questions, then if you have to answer, we will answer later. Okay? Dr. Shiraz from BRAC. Dr. Shiraz Islam.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So actually, one of the questions was raised by Madan Prasad. I was curious about your biodiversity coffee. So I was, just struggling whether it is organic coffee or something like that. But you again mentioned about that in your producing coffee, you are keeping spiders and everything's intact and something like that, and keeping other vegetations also, and that's why you are calling it a biodiversity coffee. So the question is how it differs from the organic coffee or something like the organic plantation. And you also mentioned about the smallholder farm size, land size in India is, your case is 2 hectares.
No, it's globally the definition is 10 hectares.
Yeah, but what is in Indian?
Farms we work with are less than half an acre.
Half an acre. That's right. Yeah. That was.
So on the definition in India, small is 2 hectares, marginal is 1 hectare.
Marginal is less than 1 hectare. Okay. So it's something similar like Bangladesh. And also, this is one thing to miss you. And then Mr. Shatia, still, I was really wondering that people like your age, you have seen that the people in India, especially the farmers in India, is eating mud. So it's really wondering for me because I'm much, the older than you. And then I heard about 1960s story. in the China, I heard that Chinese people used to take peat soil, not mud. It's peat soil, something is very black in color, which people's stomach can consume. I don't know what happened in the mud, how people can take mud and they consume it. That is a very curious thing for me. I could not even still believe this. But you have seen this. That is the, the uniqueness. And again, you come up with a solution with some sort of, in that type of area, with a very precise technology, with the greenhouse. Though you mentioned that it is a very small one. But in the Telangana, last November, I think, I visited Telangana. So I was struggling, why, you have a good irrigation system even developed. Nowadays, I don't know what happened in the earlier years, but how this type of, the very small greenhouse project, you bring out for this type of small farm holdings and how it is working. So though you mentioned that it's not very big, but still I think you have to maintain something to do this with the 10% water to be irrigated in that type of area. And I think this too.
What is it? Can I get the question once again?
You make it as a greenhouse in a very small size, right, in your farming, the concept or the innovations you brought. So I was wondering what size of greenhouse you have created, what infrastructure you need to do this, rather than going for the large scale production with improved irrigation systems. I heard that a lot of the irrigation systems in the Telangana state you have canals, everything. So what uniqueness you brought it here with these innovations? Thank you.
So a small question, very refreshing. Somebody's talking about biodiversity after. My question is, I'm sure it's not under any certification scheme, as you have already mentioned, but are people paying premium price because it is biodiversity-friendly coffee, as opposed to any other normal coffee farming or anything? That's the first question. And second is, I haven't heard about a lot of biodiversity in terms of India due to coffee farming. The problem was more serious and crucial in Latin America with Brazilian coffee and stuff like that. So how did you think that, was there a push that we were actually losing biodiversity because of coffee farming in Western Ghat? Because that's one of the hot spots, as I know, with so many species and stuff. So.
My question is to Satyam. You have worked with the farmers to introduce new technology which will help them for better production. But my question is, did you work for ensuring the price of the farmers' production? That's mean the farmers are producing, but sometimes they don't get the fair price. For ensuring that their product market, have you taken any initiative? Thank you.
Yes. I am from a different part of India. Fortunately, we have not seen the farmers eating mud. A very precarious, situation is so bad actually, when you're talking of these things. This happening on the ground. What we have seen is that, there are a number of innovative examples where people have facilitated, and Bangladesh also is full of community-based adaptation processes in terms of agriculture. The issue actually comes up when it gets, the science of sustainable farming has to be mainstream into the government system. Because government is still kind of, is it a production, sustainability of production, or it is a sustainability of production system. So when it comes to sustainability of production system, the sustainability of soil, the water, the natural resources, that becomes a challenge. So is there any example or any experience when people have tried to mainstream this thing, the resilient farming?
Yes. Dr. Malik.
So I don't have a specific question, but some comment. I think it's okay. It was innovations in adaptive livelihoods and agriculture. So recently we published a book by Springer on agricultural and technology innovations for agricultural development. So in this book we basically we developed an approach from Center for Development Research in Bonn University And also we partnered BRAC, IFRI, New Delhi, and 2 other countries from Africa. So our approach was due to Green Revolution approach, like agricultural productivity has been increased tremendously, but there are some negative effects. So in that approach, what we found, technology is developed in research station, then it is sent to the farmers, so, to some extent top-down approach. So in our case, we developed an approach which is sort of focus on qualitative, bottom-up planning process for identification of agricultural technology innovations. So these approach later we validated in these 4 different countries, and also especially for marginal areas, marginal rural areas. In Bangladesh, we also did marginal areas. First we did mapping, then surveying, and then sort of ex-ante assessment. And finally, what is we found from our results, like at the beginning, we started with the assumption this sort of areas, cereal crops innovations could be suitable strategy, because it was funded by Gates Foundation. They suggested to something being related with cereals, either rice, wheat, or maize. But we, at the end of the assessment, we found only cereal crops related innovations could not make their livelihood strategy as a sustainable one. So we found income diversification, farming diversification, and also sort of farming intensification. These 3 sort of diverse strategies, adoption strategies and innovations, which could address these marginalized small farmers, those all together, then it could may help their livelihoods. Other than only single thinking could not, because their livelihoods is sort of multi-occupational. So thank you.
Okay, this is a comment. Gentleman here.
Thank you. 2 quick questions. You mentioned about very poor farmers, right? So I just wanted to know the cost structure of giving the greenhouse. If they're very poor, how can they afford the capital of having the greenhouse in the first place? Is there a cost structure or a microcredit attached to it? So that's the first question. The second question to you, you mentioned that people are not really aware about the biodiversity. I mean, that is not an attraction to them when they're buying the coffee. Majority of them are really worried about the taste. So my question is that, what are you as your organization doing to raise the awareness that the biodiversity is a need for it? Because apparently the whole phenomena where you're working here, if the awareness is not there, then probably does not make much sense. Yeah.
Any other question? Any comment or question? So I now turn to our speakers. Please.
Okay, so I can't talk about coffee enough, right? So one of the other most amazing things about coffee, perhaps as compared to, again, any other crop, it's probably the most studied crop in the world. We have studied everything about coffee, not just in the Indian subcontinent, but really with research coming out of the South and Central Americas. There are institutes in the world dedicated to research on coffee agroforestry. So we were lucky enough that we were sitting on a lot of very good long-term research data on things like biodiversity loss, deforestation rates in coffee landscapes. We knew exactly where the deforestation was happening. So for example, in the largest coffee producing district in India, in Coorg, where we work, we found that from the 1970s onwards, the rate of deforestation was 33%, and that all that deforestation was happening on coffee farms. So state-managed forests were fairly good, that in fact people were removing trees from farms simply because the productivity of coffee is very, very high, right? So we were sitting on and we know there is enough research to show, for example, that when you have certain, to this level of detail, we know that when you have certain exotic trees like silver oak or eucalyptus or whatever exceeding 20% of the total number of native trees, it affects cavity nesting birds. So the point is we have studied coffee to the point where we can actually take some action on the ground to implement something. So we were really lucky. We were also lucky because we knew through research again that existing global certifications didn't have the kind of conservation impact that we wanted and didn't have the livelihood impact that we wanted. So we started by doing a 4-year study that looked at organic, fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, and then the other big certification for coffee, something called UTZ. So we looked at these certifications in the Indian context and found that they had very minimal outcomes, right? And for a whole range of reasons, but not because they were not being implemented well, simply because global certifications in the Indian subcontinent context didn't have that sort of meaning. So we knew again that we had to probably create an alternative to the existing alternative, which brings me to the point of sort of how is our farming different? Well, we've never called it organic, and we never call it sustainable. We call it biodiversity friendly simply because we're looking at a beyond, are there any chemical inputs in the farm or not? We're looking at exactly what kind of tree cover is on the farm. We're looking at how the farm, what the main water sources are around the farm, what kind of wildlife is using the farm, how can we create landscape level contiguity between coffee farms as opposed to just isolated fragments around the place. So it really is a little bit of a nerdy research project in the end, as opposed to also being a coffee company. But that's exactly why it's not just organic or not organic. We're really looking at what goes beyond just using chemical inputs. The other interesting thing about how we do our monitoring is that when you look at organic certification, you'd go back to a lab and test it for what kind of chemical residues there were. We do that, but we also go out and count the number of Luna moths you find on a farm, or the number of woodpecker nests you find on a farm, or the kind of earthworms you find in the soil. And that tells us not just whether there's chemical inputs into it or not, but really just how does the whole ecosystem function as a whole. So it's a very interesting, I think, approach to how we look at monitoring impact as well. The question about health is really interesting because we find that's probably why people drink our coffee, because they want to start the morning with something that doesn't have a toxic chemical in them. They don't really drink our coffee because it's biodiversity friendly. So as much as we've, so again, that leads to your question of what are we doing to really bring about consumer advocacy and things like that. That's difficult. And we retail our coffee across India, but we focus mostly on Bangalore as being the hub of where we can probably find coffee drinkers who might be open-minded. So we actually do a lot of coffee tasting events in the same way that people do fancy wine tasting events. So people come to drink coffee, but then they're suddenly talking about biodiversity, or they're suddenly talking about spiders, or they're suddenly talking about sustainability issues that they didn't think they were coming for, but they're now suddenly doing that. We've also tried, the other thing that I think works really well, again, possibly to our advantage, although it wasn't intended, is that we've done 100% traceable coffees, right? So anybody drinking a cappuccino anywhere from our coffee knows exactly which farm it came from, right? And for us, the traceability was important partly because farmers and producers who wanted to participate in the program got really excited about it. But we didn't realize that it probably serves in the same way that people pick up single malt whiskey from such and such distillery in Scotland, or champagne from Champagne, or whatever. It adds an exclusivity to this coffee that we didn't intended to have, but we've suddenly started, people get interested in what we're doing because of that. But finally, I mean, health, I think, will work a little bit with some consumer groups. Biodiversity really, I don't think, works too much. The single estate stuff will work, but really what we've had to focus on is being the best coffee in India. That really has to be the goal. we will always do biodiversity conservation. We will always work on livelihood security and all of that. But I think until we produce the best coffee in India, we probably won't really be able to scale up. And that's massively challenging. That's not what I thought I would be doing for the rest of my life. So what we charge a premium price for is not biodiversity related things. They are for the fact that, okay, so the other big problem with the coffee industry everywhere else in the world, and probably more for retail, actually for everywhere, is that 95% of coffee you drink is probably stale, right? So coffee should not be drunk more than 3 weeks after it was roasted. And that's what we guarantee. We guarantee that anybody drinking our coffee anywhere in India will get it within a week of it being roasted. And so that's what they pay the premium for.
Can I just add?
Yes, please.
As you were saying that you have to be the best coffee, at least in India, to sustain this whole thing, not just biodiversity or any philanthropic reason behind it. But what do you say? Is there a competition even within India? Is it quality between other farms and yours? What's the difference? It seems like a added bonus if it's biodiversity friendly, even if people don't like it.
So coffee drinkers, I think, again, like wine and whiskey drinkers, are super fussy. So people tell me my coffee doesn't taste as good as Nescafe, and then I'm hiding my head saying so coffee drinkers are very fussy. So not only does coffee have and coffee, the quality and flavor of coffee varies hugely region-wise. So coffee from Cook tastes very different from coffee from Chikmagalur, from Chittagong, from Nepal to Ethiopia to wherever. So they are blended to enhance acidity, to enhance floral notes, to enhance fruity. It's an industry in itself that's very highly professional. So a lot of what we have to do is get that flavor right. It is a very competitive kind of space as well, partly because the default that people are used to is very poor quality coffee. So then when we present them with better quality coffee, they find it funny. They find that it tastes weird. So it's an
Okay, if you can assure that drinking your coffee, we can win the T20 match, then probably Bangladeshi team can be advised to drink your coffee before they get into the field. But time is very limited. Match is today. And our coffee break is very also after a few minutes. Sudhir, just very quick. Okay.
Even though I'm talking about quality and how biodiversity is not important, etc., I should say that we probably don't really follow what I'm saying, right? So, for example, every packet of coffee is a little bit of a promotion, right? So, for example, we have 6 different kinds of coffee, and every coffee is called after an endemic wildlife species we find in the Western Ghats. So, for example, the company is called Black Baza Coffee, which is a small